Hello everyone, my name is Gilles Fransen and I'm part of PwC Belgium's transfer pricing practice. I'm here today with Ian Dykes, PwC's global transfer pricing leader. Ian, how are you doing?
Not too bad, thanks, Gilles. Good to see you.
Super excited to be here with you in London today. Really excited to be talking about AI and the impact of AI on companies' value chains and how we translate that from a transfer pricing perspective. I guess the trigger for us to have this conversation today is the study which was published by PwC last week around the impact of AI on business models. What were some of your observations from that study?
Well, I think, Gilles, in the knowledge service industry as we are, we're well used to the impact that AI is having, and we're dealing with it every day. What was interesting about the survey is the breadth of the impact that it's having. So it is impacting a wide range of industries, but it was also clear that not everyone is adopting it at the same speed, and the efficiency of the adoption, it really varies as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. For me, sort of the punchline of the overall study was the sort of increased gains that certain companies were able to gain out of this technology. But when you looked at the details, actually the impact was already quite widespread across different companies, across different industries. And in addition to that, also the impact across different domains of the value chain, I found quite striking already, where you had, for me, three main observations, given sort of also how they tied to transfer pricing models, which is the impact on productivity and cost, the impact in terms of AI replacing decision-making, previously done by humans, and then a third one around introducing AI into building out new services, new products. So those for me were three key domains. And if we sort of look at that first one, so the cost productivity components, that's probably the area which is talked about most, at least in the media. And if we look at that from what does that mean from a transfer pricing perspective, usually the adoption of AI means a reduction of cost due to the introduction of that. It may also mean that the cost remains similar if you add up the sort of remaining salary cost plus the cost of AI tokens, but you get an increase in speed, in quality of the services being delivered. So I think that's quite an interesting domain, especially in service type or cost plus service type models, where it will be important for us to look at, on the one hand, the cost base and how that is changing over time, as well as the margin profile of our intercompany transaction and how that compares to what we can absorb in databases, which is typically lagging behind a couple of years. And in the world of AI, 2 years is a very long period of time.
Right.
What were some of your thoughts on that one?
Well, I guess overall for me, the question we have to always ask in transfer pricing is, what are our sources of competitive advantage? And what is this AI adoption doing to our sources of competitive advantage? So, we hear people say, well, we're creating new IP, but we hear others say, well, this is probably just a table stake and everyone's going to have it. But at the end of the day, I think the answer for transfer pricing is often much more nuanced than that. It may well be the case that the AI adoption is eroding whatever our source of competitive advantage was. It might be that it's supercharging it, or it might be that the overall balance of our different sources of competitive advantage is changing. But at the end of the day, and this kind of comes back to your point, we have this underlying question of, well, where should the costs associated with the AI adoption arise in separate entities? But most importantly, where should the consequences of the kind of changes that you were talking about, where should they fall within our overall transfer pricing system?
Yeah, I think that's right. The second dimension that I wanted to touch on is sort of AI replacing decision-making, or AI taking decisions instead of humans. And you did a video a couple of weeks ago together with Roxy on the overall role of decision making within transfer pricing analyses. What are some of your thoughts around AI taking over some of that decision making activity?
Well, it's no secret that I think the OECD need to revisit some of the guidance on the importance of decision making. So thinking about the risk control framework, DEMPI, and the like. But when we think about the impact that AI is having on decision making, and it clearly is, it's really important for us to be clear about why do we think decision making matters for transfer pricing. If you kind of cut through all of that guidance, fundamentally the question that we're asking is who is putting capital at risk in the business? And the decisions that we really care about from a transfer pricing point of view are the decisions that control who puts the capital at risk and how. Everything else, all the other, the many decisions that we take as an organization, they fall into a category of mitigation decisions. So far, most frequently, the kind of decisions that will be taken by an algorithm will fall into that mitigation type of category. So I think that by and large, to date at least, most of the replacement of decision making that we see doesn't really impact on the big decisions that matter for transfer pricing. But that's just a general observation.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I think is quite interesting as well in this space is that at times the sort of impact of AI on decision making is not necessarily observed within the organization itself, but could be observed outside the organization. For example, the deployment of AI by suppliers, by customers, could impact the decisions or activities that still remain, that still are necessary at the level of the organization. So I think that's also quite an interesting component to consider, where looking at the sort of value chain, not just of the organization, but of the full system, is going to be quite interesting to see how does that affect the space in which decision making is still happening. Right. Maybe then just to touch on the last point, which is around new services, new products being introduced on the back of AI, which for me is not too dissimilar really to how we would typically look at new services, new products, and their effect on the tax model. Where I think it may differ to some extent is the speed at which this is being deployed, as well as the location from which these new products could be developed or funded from. That may no longer be co-located at the level of the existing or legacy IP owner. So that's quite an important component to consider as well into the overall tax model assessment. Before we close, Ian, any final thoughts from your side?
Yeah, just to reinforce your last point, I think, Gilles, it's like this is happening so quickly that organizations haven't always had the time to make sure that the way they're managing and spending money on AI fits within their traditional transfer pricing structures. That is a challenge, undoubtedly. But the main point, as you say, is that overall, the traditional approaches to transfer pricing that are embodied in the guidelines, they will apply equally to AI as they do to anything else. Whether everyone likes the outcomes that delivers is another question.
Excellent. And with that, I suggest we close this video. So I hope this was helpful. If you're interested in getting some more info on the areas where AI is having an impact today, I suggest having a look at the study in the comment section. And with that, thank you, Ian, for having the conversation today. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and bye for now.